Hello and welcome to another edition of the Front Page on GNet TV. My name is Andrew McKeever, the managing editor of the Manchester Journal. It's my pleasure to be here with you and to be your host today. Today we have in our studio with us Mr. John Broderick, who's the Executive Director of Shires Housing, better known by some perhaps as the Regional Affordable Housing Corporation. John, welcome to GNet.
Thank you, Andrew.
Great to have you with us today. We're here to talk a little bit about affordable housing, and before we get started, just by way of introduction, John, before he became the Executive Director of Shires Housing back in January of 2009, was the State Advocacy Director for the Supportive Housing Network of New York. And before that, he served as the Director of Government and Community Relations for Neighborhood Housing Services in New York City. Well, John, you've been here at your post now for about 5 years or so, studying the needs of affordable housing here in Bennington County. And I guess just to kind of get things started, what is your assessment of the need of affordable housing here in this area? Is it more than it was the case back in January of '09 when you began with Shires Housing, or about the same, or is it getting worse?
Well, Andrew, first let me just say thank you for having me, and I'm really glad to be living and working here in Vermont in the business that I started in many years ago. Right. Affordable housing is a really important thing for keeping our society together, for keeping towns and communities together and strong. And I'm really glad to be working for an organization like Shires Housing, which was formerly known as RAC, or Regional Affordable Housing Corporation.
Right. That's how many of us remember it.
Right. So I'm really proud to be working for a really great organization that has been such a part of things here in the county, and especially here in Manchester, for about 15 years now. So as we all know, the economy has been through a difficult time over the past 5 years, and as you might imagine, people who are at the lower end of the economic spectrum have had a pretty tough time. Housing is important for everyone, and I think that we've found it's been particularly difficult for folks who have lost their jobs and who are struggling to make ends meet to keep a roof over their heads.
Sure.
So I'm glad that we've been able to help people and fill that gap.
So I guess affordable housing has long been identified as a problem. I mean, RAC was working very diligently on this problem, Shires Housing, I should say, back in the 1990s and the early part of the 21st century. I mean, what is the main challenge behind affordable housing from the standpoint of providing it? Is it the cost of construction of building affordable homes? Is it the cost of acquiring the land? What is the main stumbling block? Well,
affordable housing is a really misunderstood concept and a moving target, so it might be helpful if I just sort of clarified and put it in perspective.
Absolutely.
Affordable to whom is the real question. Affordable to people at what income levels? So in our industry, we generally we sort of peg things to percentages of the median income. Median income for our county is around $62,000, and there are various programs and various initiatives out there to help people at different levels of the median income. The primary financing mechanism we use for the developments that we've done here in the North Shire, in Manchester and in Arlington, is the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, which targets people making just below 60% of the median income. So most of the people who live in the apartments that we have would be earning less than about $36,000, depending on family size, but also earning enough to pay the rent without going over a third of their income for the rent. So we have a narrow band of people that we're able to serve, between $25,000 and $36,000 approximately, and I think that's a really important income group. It's people who are making $12, $13, $14, $15 an hour, who often don't qualify for other benefits, and our government made a decision many years ago that we were going to institute the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program in order to expand the possibilities for people in that income group. In addition, for many, many years, we've had other programs, public housing, which serves people at closer to 30% of median income. We have the Section 8 program, which people know as, there are two kinds of Section 8. Project-based, where the subsidy stays with the apartment, and then vouchers, which people can take to, portably to various landlords. There are several Section 8 developments in Manchester that were developed by a private developer, and they're successful developments as well. In addition, there are home ownership programs that are affordable housing programs, because I think the decision was made a long time ago that we needed to help the people who were just barely able to get that down payment together and get the first get the closing costs together and be able to afford a mortgage. So there's even a development here in Manchester, East Branch Farms, where some of the units were made affordable to people at 80 to 100% of median income. So it's been it's a broad and diverse industry, but frequently affordable housing is sort of lumped together. So it's helpful to have a deeper understanding of it.
So is what you're doing today kind of comparable in some way to what might have been going on 10 years ago when RAC, Shires Housing, was building developments, or are you looking to kind of get into existing housing stock and convert it into an affordable housing situation for someone who's in that $25,000 to $36,000 a year income group?
Well, I wasn't here 15 years ago, but our first development, Manchester Knoll, which is off of Richville Road, was built in 2000, so just about 14, 15 years ago. And it was built, like I said, in 1999 and came online in 2000. And at the time, I understand the outlet stores were booming, the economy was strong, but I think people felt that the housing was pretty expensive here in Manchester. And if we were going to have an economy that depended on people working in outlet stores, not to mention inns and restaurants and other parts of the economy, that it would be a good idea to build something closer to Manchester so that those workers didn't have to commute in from outside. We proceeded. 2 years later, we built another development. The first one had 20, the second one had 16. And they're right adjacent to each other, Manchester Knoll and Manchester Commons. And for many years, those apartments were completely full and booming. I think when the economy started to decline, we started to see that. And we started to see people having to, when they lost their jobs, having to leave our apartments. And we tracked and followed where they were going. Many left town, many left the state. So I think that affordable housing developments ebb and flow with the economy. We're right now, while we still have a couple of vacancies left, we have the lowest number of vacancies since 2011. And I think that we're headed back into stronger times for our economy, and therefore more demand for the apartments that we have.
I'm surprised that there's any vacancies. I mean, you would think that with the economy, as you say, being pretty shaky since 2009 and slowly recovering, but still such a need for relatively low cost or affordable housing that you would have a waiting list for people that wanted to get into whatever was available, but not so, I guess, eh?
Demand has increased significantly over the past few months. We have really nice apartments. I've been through the apartments. They're nicer than a lot of the places that I lived in my earlier part of my life. And, a lot of people need rental assistance and often don't have it. Their only source of income is employment. And when they don't make that much money, or when they have a limited number of hours, it's tough. And I think we've found a lot of people have doubled up, moved in with parents, moved in with friends, and but we're hoping for a strong future here.
So John, are there any restrictions on what on the people who can qualify for some of these apartments? I mean, do they have to be within a certain income range? I'm thinking, with Habitat for Humanity, for instance, another group around the area that provides affordable housing, one building at a time in most cases. They have to help out with building them, or they have to be within a certain income level. Do any of those criteria apply with what you're doing?
There are. There are several. In fact, many. The first
All right,
is
we've
income.
got time.
The first is income, which I
Right.
mentioned.
Yep.
And 60% of the median income is the max for most of the apartments we have. Every development that we do has a range. We have a few apartments that are just market rate where there are no restrictions on the income. But the low-income housing tax credit program requires that the head of household not be a full-time student. We certainly do credit checks, we do criminal background checks, we do prior landlord references. We have lots of rules and standards for how we live, and that is really to protect the other residents nearby.
Sure.
I think we have probably more rules than most. But we like to talk about them as standards and not rules. In fact, we have a really nice newsletter that we send out for our residents that talks about the rules in terms of, just it's multifamily housing. And a lot of people in Vermont have never really lived in multifamily housing before. So living with neighbors upstairs or right next door, sharing walls, we sometimes have to talk things through. And it's good to have standards like that.
Oh, yeah.
So, but in terms of restrictions, it's pretty much the income restrictions that we have to abide by.
So, would you be planning to do any more, developments, or is it kind of just a case of managing the properties you already have and kind of waiting to see what happens from there?
Well, we have a new development in the works in Bennington, which will be 24 apartments, all new construction on vacant land close to the town. And here in Manchester, we're starting to prepare for rehabilitation of the first one that we did, Manchester Knoll.
Okay.
As you know, this housing is a long-term investment. It's a long-term investment for the town of Manchester, and we make a long-term commitment when we build something to stick with it all the way through. So in a way, our housing is like a road or a bridge or a school, and that it requires constant maintenance and constant attention. 15 years ago, we were not building to the energy standards that we're building to now.
Yeah.
So we're looking forward to, in hopefully the spring of 2016, to go into Manchester Knoll and do some work, which will be some cosmetic improvements on the outside and some work on the kitchens and bathrooms, but most importantly, new systems that are more modern technologies and better energy efficiency. All of our apartments include heat, so if we have to pay it, it's certainly in our interest to make sure that they're the most energy efficient buildings possible.
Now, I'm assuming that if someone rents one of the apartments from you at one of those developments, they can be pretty much assured that you're going to be their landlord pretty much forever. Or would there ever be a case where you would sell one of those developments to a private developer or anything like that, or are they always going to be, maintained by you folks?
Well, here in Vermont, the policy is permanent affordability. So when we take money from Vermont Housing Finance Agency, Vermont Housing Conservation Board, Shires Housing makes a commitment to stick with that and make sure it's affordable housing in perpetuity. So we make a long-term commitment, and it really wouldn't be possible for us to sell the entire development off to the private sector. But that said, people do leave, and we're actually sometimes sad to see people go, but every year we have someone that buys a house. And we're pretty proud of that, because I think one of the important things of this model of affordable housing is by providing people quality housing that they can afford, they can put aside a little bit of money every month and set aside that money for a down payment.
Oh, sure.
And we're happy to see that.
Yeah.
And that's really how it's intended.
So it's kind of like a starting point for folks who they start with an apartment with you folks, save up some money over some time, and then they're able to afford a mortgage to buy their own home if that's what they decide to do.
That's right. We also serve an important, we serve various segments of the population, including a number of elderly people. And for elderly folks, this might actually be the last place that they choose to live before going to a care facility of some sort. But it's an important niche for us, the people who are just starting out in the workforce, who are just starting their families, and we look forward to folks being able to buy their first house, and we really celebrate that.
Sure. I was just wondering, how does Bennington County, Manchester, and Arlington, and Bennington compare with the statewide picture around Vermont? Are we kind of Do we have a greater need by most yardsticks for affordable housing compared to the rest of the state, or are we kind of roughly tracking in the middle of the picture?
Well, we have in Vermont, and one of the measurements that we use here for this nationally is what we call the affordability gap, which is how much does it really take, how much do you have to earn to afford the average price rental for an area. And for Bennington County, this is a number that's published each year by the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the Vermont Affordable Housing Coalition, where I'm on the steering committee. And it was determined just last month that you need to make $19 an hour in order, working full time, to be able to afford the average priced apartment in Vermont. And that's pretty bad. That's you know, as you know, there's a lot of people who don't make $19 an hour doing basic,
Sure.
you know, service sector work. So there's an affordability gap. It's a little bit more severe down here than it is. Let me not say more severe. It's different. The dynamic is different in a place like Manchester or Bennington or Burlington. Burlington has a really hot market, very, very low vacancy rate, and I think folks up there in this income group are having a pretty tough time. Here in Manchester, it's also tough, and again, related to the economy, but it's a different kind of tough. It's not a hot rental market where apartments are going for $1,800 and $1,900 a month. It's more a matter of if you're working in a service sector job or if you're working in an outlet store, can you live close by? Can you live in Manchester? Or do you have to commute to a smaller town on the outskirts? And I think we are still finding a lot of that. And I think it's pretty true that there's a lot of traffic coming into Manchester in the morning from the smaller towns on the outside. And I think it would be great for the economy here to have more people who work here live here.
Oh, sure. And I know that's been a goal of town officials for quite some time, is to have a good mix of housing for the entire range of folks working in town.
That's right.
And that's been perceived as a real problem, that it's really tough for someone, as you say, working in a, don't want to pick on the outlet stores, but you know, someone who's working in a service job where they're not making 6 figures a year to be able to afford to live locally.
That's right. You know, to come back to an earlier question about our future plans and what we're doing, you know, this East Branch Farms development that's right sort of behind Aubuchon Hardware there was, there are 12 units that were built back there, and several of them were restricted for people in a certain income range. I think it's up to 100% of the median income. That's a really important market, and there's room, and there's actually permitted, been approved for more to be developed back there. I think that's on the horizon. Whether it'll be us that does it or a private developer or someone else has yet to be seen, but that's a really important niche. People who are just starting families, who want to buy something but can't afford the average priced house. It's a perfect opportunity for starter homes. I've gotten to know some of the people that live there, and I'm really glad that we've been able to help facilitate folks living there and being in Manchester where they really choose to be, and still being able to own a home.
I just wondered, I remember hearing, and this is going back a few years, that a lot of building contractors who might for one reason or another thought it would have been a nice thing to build some affordable housing units rather than building a McMansion or whatever, or really, you know, more expensively priced homes, really had a problem with that because the cost of construction was so much that it didn't make economic sense for them to build low-cost housing. I mean, are there any incentives for contractors or government programs that, you know, make that more enticing from a financial standpoint, where they could build a home that costs something that, you know, the average working person could afford and still make a profit out of constructing the home?
Well, you're right. That's tough. It's very, very difficult. The cost of construction is very, very high, and we pay the same cost that the private sector pays to build. Thing is, when you use government resources, it comes with restrictions, because the government, you know, federal government and here in Vermont are not in the business of subsidizing construction so that entities can go off and make substantial profits. So that if private investors do choose to do that, they have to agree to those restrictions. And I think that we've seen that not happening as much recently. It certainly did happen in the past with other programs. There are 3 privately owned and privately developed Section 8 developments here in Manchester that were built by a private company, still managed by the entity that did the development. But that program doesn't exist anymore. And the other programs have not been utilized as much by private investors recently.
Okay. Well, we're just about out of time, John, but I just thought in closing, I just was wondering if you had a ballpark number of the number of affordable housing units that countywide we're short of. In a perfect world, how many more would be available for folks to
You're
acquire?
ending this on a tough question, Andrew.
Oh. Well, I'm saving the best for last. I just wondered, is there a number that basically says, well, if we had 2,000 more, if we had 1,000 more, is there anything in that range, or are we talking about a much higher number than that? Because anecdotally, I hear a lot from folks who, particularly younger folks, who would like to live in Manchester, Arlington, I'm sure in Bennington as well, and as you said, or kind of just feel financially they just can't afford it. It's tough to even afford an apartment. But I just wondered, if you could wave a wand and say there shall be, X number of units coming online, what would that number be?
Well, I don't have a magic number like that in my pocket, but I will make a few comments about it. The vacancy rate in an average rental market is 5%, and here it's closer to 2%. Okay. So we have a very tight market.
Yeah, okay.
I also think that Manchester, I think, is the only town in Bennington County that gained population in the 2010 census from the 2000 census. Huh. I think the whole county would benefit a lot from a population growth. So I think it's important that we attract folks here because that just gets the economy moving again.
Yeah.
So I think it would be great for us to build lots and lots more housing for all income ranges. And I would love to see the private sector housing starts really get kicking. I'd like to see Habitat continue on its journey on Jennifer Lane. Right. I'd like to see us get Manchester Knoll rehabbed. And I'd like to see local contractors get all this work. And I think that's really what we need. So rather than finding like we need this number of units and then we'll be fine, I think it's more of a process. Okay. And I think that making this an attractive place for people to come and live and work is what raises all the boats.
Sure, sure, absolutely. Well, on that note then, I guess we're just about out of time, but I wanted to thank you again, John, for taking the time to come by and talk with us about this really important issue. I know it's also been a long-term issue and probably will continue to be for a while to come, but the work that your organization is doing is very important to meeting a real important need here in our community.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thanks for highlighting this issue, and I'm glad that my organization can be part of the solution.
All right. Well, great. Well, there we are, and thank you all for watching as well. This has been The Front Page on GNET TV. My name's Andrew McKeever. Pleasure to be here with my guest today, John Broderick of Shires Housing. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we'll see you again the next time.